Jayo Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jayo Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jam Vishnu Pad Padamamsa Parvājakacārya Astotarasata Shishimad His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Jai Jam Vishnu Pad Padamamsa Parvājakacārya Astotarasata Shishimad Shringa Guru Shili Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj Ki Jai Anantikoti Vaishnava Ki Jai ISKCON BBT Founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai Premsa Gaur Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaura Bhaktavinda Ki Jai Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopi Gopinath Shyamakund Radhakund Giri Govardhan Ki Jai Jamunamaya Gangamaya Ki Jai Tulsi Devi Bhakti Devi Ki Jai Granthara Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai Their Divine Lordship Shri Shri Rukmini Dwarkadish Ki Jai Their Divine Lordship Shri Shri Jagannath Baldev Srimati Subhadra Ki Jai Their Divine Lordship Shri Shri Gornitai Ki Jai Transcendental Book Distribution Ki Jai Harinam Sankirtan Ki Jai Transcendental Harinam Jagya Ki Jai Transcendental Prasadam Distribution Ki Jai Gaur Premananda Hari Hari Bol All glories to the Summa Devotees Hare Krishna All glories to the Summa Devotees Hare Krishna All glories to the Summa Devotees Hare Krishna All glories Shri Shri Guru and Shri Gauranga All glories to the Prabhupada Jai Namo Vishnu Jai Krishna Jai Buddha Smriti Jai Patak Swami Nislamani Namacharya Pradhani Jai Gaur Kadita Namo Vishnu Jai Krishna Jai Buddha Smriti Bhaktivedanta Swami Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauranga Pacharani Session Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya So you heard of the term fired up? So we'll discuss a little bit about that. Go into it and analyze it. We'll see what it means. So today we're reading from the Srimad Bhagavatam. This is the 3rd canto, chapter 27, Understanding Material Nature. And, excuse me, the word I chose today is balīyasā, which means by offering the result. So whatever a devotee offers, or whatever he does, he offers to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And in this chapter, this is one analogy. There's 3 analogies we'll discuss. Very powerful realizations to help us understand the transformative power of Bhakti Yoga. So in this particular one, we could see the fire consuming wooden sticks. And it emphasizes that redirecting our desires towards pleasing the Supreme Lord, we can extinguish the very flames of material existence. So we'll discuss that more. So there's also, we'll discuss, there's some practical principles for cultivating devotional service. There's actually 18 of them that are described in these verses that are surrounding today's verse. And so that's what we want to do. We want to awaken our Krishna consciousness and offer every action to Krishna. So let's dive into the verse. Sarva-bhūta-samatvena nirvaireṇāprasaṅgataḥ brahma-caryeṇa maunena sva-dharmeṇa balīyasā sarva-bhūta-samatvena nirvaireṇāprasaṅgataḥ brahma-caryeṇa maunena sva-dharmeṇa balīyasā sarva-bhūta-samatvena nirvaireṇāprasaṅgataḥ brahma-caryeṇa maunena sva-dharmeṇa balīyasā sarva-bhūta-samatvena brahma-caryeṇa maunena sva-dharmeṇa balīyasā sarva-bhūta-samatvena maunena brahmaṇa balīyasā sarva-bhūta-samatvena nirvaireṇāprasaṅgataḥ brahma-caryeṇa maunena sva-dharmeṇa balīyasā sarva-bhūta-samatvena nirvaireṇāprasaṅgataḥ brahma-caryeṇa maunena sarva-bhūta-samatvena nirvaireṇāprasaṅgataḥ brahma-caryeṇa maunena sva-dharmeṇa balīyasā. Vaishnavis. Sarva-bhūta-samatvena nirvaireṇāprasaṅgataḥ brahma-caryeṇa maunena sva-dharmeṇa balīyasā nirvaireṇāprasaṅgataḥ brahma-caryeṇa maunena sva-dharmeṇa balīyasā sarva-bhūta-samatvena nirvaireṇāprasaṅgataḥ brahma-caryeṇa maunena sva-dharmeṇa balīyasā. Sarva, all. Bhuta, living entities. Samatvena, by seen equally. Nirvaireṇa, without enmity. Aprasaṅgataḥ, without intimate connections. Brahmacaryeṇa, by celibacy. Maunena, by silence. Sva-dharmeṇa, by one's occupation. Balīyasā, by offering the result. Translation and purport by Srila Prabhupada. In executing devotional service, one has to see every living entity equally. without enmity towards anyone, yet without intimate connections with anyone. One has to observe celibacy, be grave, and execute his eternal activities, offering the results to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Purport. A devotee of the Supreme Personality of Godhead who seriously engages in devotional service is equal to all living entities. There are various species of living entities, but a devotee does not see the outward covering. He sees the inner soul inhabiting the body. Because each and every soul is part and parcel of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He does not see any difference. That is the vision of a learned devotee. As explained in the Bhagavad-gītā, a devotee or a learned sage does not see any difference between a learned brahmaṇa, a dog, an elephant, or a cow, because he knows that the body is the outer covering only, and that the soul is actually part and parcel of the Supreme Lord. So here's a visual of what Prabhupada's talking about. This is from the Bhagavad-gītā 5:18. Vidya vinaya sampane brahmane ka vihastini sunichaiva sapake cha panditata samadarshanaha. So this verse explains that the truly enlightened sage sees all living beings equally, whether they're highly educated, priests, you can see they're animals, social outcasts, which are like the dog eaters, and because they understand that the same divine essence, the supersoul, dwells in every being. And in the purport, Srila Prabhupada explains very nicely that while bodies may differ due to karma and material nature, a Krishna conscious person recognizes that the supersoul is present in all beings equally as a friend and witness. So though the individual soul is limited to experiencing a particular type of body, the supersoul is present in all bodies simultaneously. Okay, so that's just a visual of the purport. We'll continue the purport. A devotee has no enmity toward any living entity, but that does not mean that he mixes with everyone. That is prohibited. Aprasaṅgataḥ means not to be in intimate touch with everyone. A devotee is concerned with his execution of devotional service, and he should therefore mix with devotees only in order to advance his objective. He has no business mixing with others, for although he does not see anyone as his enemy, his dealings are only with persons who engage in devotional service. A devotee should observe the vow of celibacy. Celibacy does not necessitate that one be absolutely free from sex life. Satisfaction with one's wife is permitted, also under the vow of celibacy. The best policy is to avoid sex life altogether. That is preferable. Otherwise, a devotee can get married under religious principles and live peacefully with a wife. A devotee should not speak needlessly. A serious devotee has no time to speak of nonsense. He's always busy in Krishna consciousness. Whenever he speaks about Krishna. Maunena means silence. Silence does not mean that one should not speak at all, but that he should not speak of nonsense. He should be very enthusiastic in speaking about Krishna. Another important item described here is sva-dharmeṇa, or being exclusively occupied in one's eternal occupation, which is to act as the eternal servitor of the Lord, or to act in Krishna consciousness. The next word, balīyasā means offering the results of all activities to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. A devotee does not act on his personal account for sense gratification. Whatever he earns, whatever he eats, and whatever he does, he offers for the satisfaction of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Jai. So, Om Jnana Tamarandasya Gyananjana Salakaya Chakshusumaitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhistam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Upagadamayam Dadati Svapadantikam Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadha Shivasari Gaur Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Vanchakopa Tubhischa Kripasindu Bevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namah. Okay, let's do the translation again. In executing devotional service, one has to see every living entity equally, without enmity toward anyone, yet without intimate connections with anyone. One has to observe celibacy, be grave, and execute his eternal activities, offering the results to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So just to show you where we are in this particular chapter, right here, we're on text number 7. So as we can see there, between 6 and 11, it talks about attaining liberation by yoga. And then if we break this down further, we could see here the process, Astanga Yoga, plus hearing, plus faith in the Lord. So 7 to 10 is where these 18 qualities I mentioned is what we have to cultivate in devotional service. And then 11 talks about the characteristics of the Lord. So that just gives you a quick summary. So just to mention about text 7 to 8, these are the practical principles for cultivating devotional service. And this section provides the guidelines for the devotees, including the importance of seeing all living entities equally, maintaining a detached yet respectful attitude, observing celibacy. So it goes on, and we'll discuss that further. And then 9 and 10, it talks about transcending material consciousness through our spiritual vision. So that shows the importance of distinguishing matter and spirit, and identifying with spirit, not matter. And then 11 to 13, it talks about perceiving the Lord's presence in everything. So we recognize the Supreme Lord's reflection even within the illusion of the false ego. We'll talk about that in the analogy of the sun's reflection in the water as we go on. So as we just went through these sections here. So let's get into those qualities for developing devotional service. And these are from text 7 to 10. And also in their purports, Srila Prabhupada really breaks it down. So we'll dive into these, and some of these we'll just go briefly, and others we'll discuss a little further. So here's the first one. Sarva-bhūta-samatvena, samatva, is being equal to all living beings. So a devotee, he sees the soul within every being, and he recognizes their connection with the Supreme Lord. And so thus, the next one, he has nirvaireṇā, and that is, he has no enmity. So he treats everyone equally. Just imagine approaching every task we do, every interaction, as an offering to something greater than yourself. So that's why he has no enmity, because he offers everything he does to Krishna. And so then the third one, it's Aprasaṅgataḥ, no intimate connections. And Prabhupada mentions, while friendly to all, a devotee avoids unnecessary intimate connections because he's focused on spiritual advancement through association with his fellow devotees. And then 4, brahmacaryeṇa, and this is celibacy, or as Prabhupada said, regulated married life. And in the purport, Prabhupada further clarified that celibacy is ideal, but regulated married life is permissible, emphasizing the importance of avoiding excessive sense gratification. So in our Vedic view, sex is even viewed as service to the Supreme Lord. And we know that verse in the Bhagavad-gītā. And it's a means to bring souls into the world with divine consciousness. And to see that's how you could change the world. So there's various rituals that we perform to invoke divinity and positive energies during conception, pregnancy, and birth. And they're aiming to instill spiritual impressions on the child's mind. So that's why we prioritize spirituality. It doesn't negate worldly pursuits. Instead, we're transforming them, making them part of a larger journey of spiritual growth and service. So just like the animals, we have these intertwined, primal drives with the animals. And who knows what those primal drives are? There's 4. Anybody name one? Yes, that's 1. Eating. 2. Sleeping. And 3. 4. Defending or fearing. That's bhaya. And that fearing is constant and pervasive experience, unlike the other 3. Like we have these other 3 drives, but fearing is constant. These other ones, they have a starting point and ending point. Just like animals, they graze throughout the day, but their eating is still driven by a natural rhythm, right? So similarly, sleep and mating follow a natural cycle. But fear, it has no such boundaries, and it can persist relentlessly. So that's why we have to have a balance in all 3 of these drives, because they can amplify our fear. So just like if you're eating improperly, what's going to happen? You're going to get disease, and it increases the fear of illness. Even in Japan, I heard there's these companies there, they incentivize their employees to get adequate sleep because they realized that they were just trying to, do so much, and they were noticing that they were starting to get diseases. So the disturbed sleep patterns, that contribute to anxiety and fear, about our health, our well-being. And just like today's modern trend is like, we work throughout the night, we push like Superman or Superwoman mentality, but it's detrimental to our health, and it leads to increased fear of heart attacks and other ailments, even among younger people. So sex life, if not conducted in accordance with spiritual principles and scriptural injunctions, so it can also intensify fear and anxiety. So these 4 drives, they share with the animal kingdom, but humans, they have a unique capacity for spiritual inquiry. That's at brahma-caryeṇa. So that we want to pursue spiritual understanding because we're on a spiritual journey. So that sets us apart because we have this path to transcend our limitations and these primal drives and ultimately get free from fear. Just like Srila Prabhupada said, what do you feel when you chant Hare Krishna? Prabhupada says, I feel no fear. So this is Abhay Charana Vinda. So this is all described there. So let's go to 5. Talks about maunena, being grave. So we have gravity of speech. So a devotee avoids frivolous talk and speaks thoughtfully, focusing on Krishna. So while silence is encouraged for avoiding idle chatter, as devotees, we're enthusiastic to talk about Krishna, right, and his glories. So 6, sva-dharmeṇa balīyasā, offering the results of one's activities to the Lord. This is what it is described there. Or performance of one's eternal occupation, and this refers to acting as an eternal servant of the Lord in all activities. So this is what performing them for Krishna's satisfaction. And that's what Prabhupada says, acting in Krishna consciousness. So we're prioritizing spirituality And that's what transforms our worldly pursuits, by shifting our focus from material desires to a higher purpose. Just like a law student, right, is preparing for the bar exam. And so what he'll do is forego watching movies for months and hanging out with his friends and doing these things. It's not because he doesn't enjoy movies or his friends, but because he's chosen to prioritize a higher pleasure of achieving the top ranks and pass the exam, right? So that's what we do. We similarly prioritize our spiritual life. It can lead to experiencing a level of pleasure that's with connecting with the super soul that surpasses the pleasures, even like sex. So, as we mentioned, these human beings and humans, humans and animals, they share the basic desires for food, sleep, sex, and security. But what separates us is that capacity for spiritual inquisitiveness. And just like it's described, this spiritual journey that we're on, it's a curiosity that we have, and it has 5 key questions concerning our journey. Just like any other journey like we take, if you're going to fly to India or, go somewhere in the United States, we have to have these 5 questions. We have to know its current location, its destination, the experience we'll have, in that destination, and the path it needs to take, and the obstacles we may face. So these are those 5 things. So in our journey of the soul, what is our location now? What's our destination after death? What's the experience it'll have in that destination? And the path we need to take, and the obstacles we may face. So when we focus on these questions and then we prioritize our spiritual journey, then our worldly pursuits become insignificant or subservient, to this higher goal. So it doesn't mean that we abandon our worldly pursuits, but actually we're aligning them with our spiritual goals. Just like another example is like of a boxer, right? His diet is different than a gymnast because his goals are different. So similarly, a spiritual seeker, his approach to eating and sleeping and sex and security will be shaped by his spiritual aspirations. So we just see. So that alignment involves sublimating our desires and channeling our energies from worldly pursuits to a higher purpose for our spiritual growth. So let's move on. So 7 is this yadrichaya paladena santushto. So that means satisfaction with what comes of its own accord. So we just see that the devotee is satisfied whatever comes, like with whether it's income, material pursuits, things like that. So he knows that his happiness and distress is predestined. And number 8, mitabuk, regulated eating. We talked about that. And how we should eat to maintain the body and soul, avoiding gluttony and consuming only prasadam. And number 9, muni, thoughtful. So we should always think of Krishna, how to render better service to Krishna. And Prabhupada says, that should be our anxiety. So 10, vivikta sadhana. That means living in a secluded place. So devotee seeks an environment conducive for spiritual practice. So preferably a sacred place inhabited by other devotees, right? Away from materialistic distractions. Nu Dwarkadam ki jai. And then santo, peacefulness. One cultivates peaceful mind, free from agitation. You see, so that way we can focus on our bhakti yoga. And then we have maitra, friendliness. As mentioned, a devotee is friendly towards everyone, but he's reserving his intimate friendship for fellow devotees. And he keeps a respectful distance from others. 13, karuna, compassion. One exhibits compassion towards the innocent and less spiritually advanced. So he guides them toward Krishna consciousness. That's our Sankirtan Yogya that Prabhupada was talking about the other day. And then Atmavan, self-possessed or determined. So that's being situated in our spiritual position. We don't forget our main concerns to make advancement spiritually. But we don't ignorantly identify ourselves with our body and mind. So 15 is the Sanubande chadehesmin akurvan asad agraham. So that means no bodily identification or attraction for bodily relationships. So we understand a clear distinction between spirit and matter. So we don't have that bodily attraction. So here's the 16. Jnanena drishta tatvena prakrite purushasya cha nivrita buddhi avastano. So that means transcending the three stages of material consciousness and seeing the reality by realizing knowledge of spirit and matter again. So that's that transcendental vision, and sees everything as a reflection of the Supreme Lord and his energies. And then 17 is Duri Bhutanya Darshanaha, being aloof from all their conceptions of life. That means being free from the false ego. That, one sheds the illusion of being the controller, the enjoyer, and he recognizes that Krishna is the supreme proprietor and enjoyer. And then the last one here, Atmadrik, self-realized. That means we're situated in the transcendental position. We transcend that material consciousness, and we focus solely on Krishna and his service. So in the purports of those particular ones, Prabhupada really brings out the need for purity of consciousness, distinguishing between genuine devotional service and mere rituals or mental speculation. So these 18 qualities, they help us develop that sincere dedication and practice of bhakti yoga. So here's our analogy of the fire-consuming wood. So this shows, as we mentioned, how sincere devotional service can eradicate the root cause of material bondage. And that is, Prabhupada mentions, is two things. Is material nature, is seen in the karmis for enjoying, and to merge with the Supreme, as seen with the jnanis. So it's interesting how this fire represents the symbolizing purifying power of bhakti yoga, or devotional service. And it represents intense focus and dedication required to burn away all these material attachments. So the wooden sticks, they represent those very desires that fuel material existence. So that's the control of the material world and the longing to become one with the Supreme. And these are the desires that are responsible for igniting the fire of material life. That becomes the fuel to sustain it. So just as the way the analogy works, like fire rises from and is sustained by the wooden sticks. And that's our entanglement in the material world. It stems from and is perpetuated by these two fundamental desires that we described. But the analogy further explains that that same fires caused by the sticks can also consume them entirely. So similarly, the consistent, dedicated devotional service, the very desires that bind us to the material world can be eradicated. So that's the extinguishing fuel. It acts as the consuming sticks that's purifying our consciousness. And then we transcend these material desires. So that's nice. And then this connects with all the different analogies, these three analogies. It'll help us understand this entire chapter. And practically every verse you can try to analyze. And it relates to the sun's reflection on the water and the dream versus wakefulness. So let's dive into those other two analogies. So here's the sun, which represents the soul, or the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna. It's the source of light and life, and it remains aloof and unaffected by its surroundings. And then we see the water. That symbolizes the material world with its constant flux, impurities, ever-changing nature. And it represents the realm of the three modes of material nature: goodness, passion, and ignorance. And that That's what influences the conditioned soul. And then the reflection, it depicts the apparent interaction of the soul with the material world. So while the reflection appears to be on the water's surface, it remains a separate entity, untouched by the water's qualities. So just see that the main points is we're trying to get from this analogy is detachment. The sun remains unaffected by the water's movements and impurities. So like a devotee, he's engaged in bhakti yoga, he remains detached from the influences of the material world, though seemingly present in the material realm. So that's being Krishna conscious. And then the transcendental nature, this analogy emphasizes the transcendental nature of the soul and its distinction from the material body. So the sun's reflection there is merely an image, not the sun itself. So similarly, the soul is distinct from the material body and its experiences. And then it goes on and on describing more things about our perception of the Lord's presence everywhere. We see his reflection everywhere, and how we become liberated by this detachment. So this is our focus on internal instead of the external, and developing that devotion so that we can attain our goal. And then the last analogy is a dream versus wakefulness. So we can see the dream state, it represents the conditioned state of a living entity, whereas consciousness is clouded by ignorance, illusion, and attachment to the material world. So just as a dream, we experience relationships and possessions. They appear real and significant, and all they lead to is anxiety, fear, and attachment. Whereas wakefulness, it symbolizes the state of spiritual awakening, where one realizes the temporary and illusory nature of the material world. And this awakening leads to our shift in our consciousness, where the soul recognizes its true nature and it's distinct from the material body. So this is gives you an idea of that. So the real dream within this material world is to be engaged in devotional service in such a way that even in our dreams, we see the object of our journey. And there's many examples of that we could see even today. Our philosophy is a living philosophy, right? So we even have saints among us that experience this. We read about it in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, and even Lord Chaitanya had mystical dreams. He dreamed about Krishna. So even devotees, they have these experiences. Maybe we can discuss those later. And the last slide here is that when we wake up from the dream, then we discover the reality of the spiritual world. So that's what we're doing. We're kindling, we're becoming fired up. We're kindling the fire of devotion to burn away our material desires and awaken our eternal bliss. So there's a nice story where Narada Muni is explaining to Vyasadeva his experience of death. Because that's our journey, right? To death. Then what happens that? Then our journey actually begins. And this is what he says to Vyasadeva. Evam Krishnamatir Brahman nasaktasyam alatmanaha kala padurda bhutkale tadit sadamani yata. And so, Brahmana Vyasadeva, in due course of time, I, who was fully absorbed in thinking of Krishna, and who therefore had no attachments, being completely freed from all material taints, met with death as lightning and illumination occur simultaneously. So it's a beautiful purport by Srila Prabhupada. So I just took the what do you say, to convert this into a poem. And I'd just like to read that. It summarizes the purport and the verse and what we've been talking about today. So I'll end with this poem. This is a poetic verse adaptation. As lightning splits the darkened sky, so does the soul from matter fly. When one in Krishna's thought complete, with death's swift passage comes to meet. No earthly bonds can hold the mind that leaves all mortal cares behind. Like iron glowing fierce and bright, transformed by sacred inner light. For as the wealthy spurn the small, so does the sage release it all. Material wants fade clean away when Krishna's love holds sovereign sway. And in that final flash of change, beyond all fleeting forms so strange, the spirit rises pure and free into eternal ecstasy, where mortal shadows fade to naught, and all is light and Krishna thought. The soul at last its home attains, where endless joy and wisdom reigns. So that's how Bhakti Yoga helps us transcend these material attachments and achieve this state of unwavering connection with the divine, and to end our journey there. So I'd like to end there, and maybe anyone has any comments or questions or realizations. Okay, well, thank you very much for your kind attention. All glories to Srimad Bhagavatam, all glories to Srila Prabhupada.
Yeah, otherwise, anybody who watches the class are like, we're completely missing all those good points.